I see that Diet Coke, Stephanie.
It's the official soft
The
drink.
further away the healthier seltzer
Right.
is.
We can get some sponsorship there. It's taking a while to. There we go.
You're streaming.
It says it's streaming for a while before it actually goes, and then it pops up, and if you don't have it muted, then you're hearing yourself with a 10-second delay. All right, so we are recording now. Very good. I'm just going to pull up the agenda, make sure I have that handy. Good. I'm called to order the special meeting of the Easton Reading Region 9 Joint Boards of Education Policy Committee at 9:19 a.m. on December 11th, 2020. Members in attendance. We have Christopher Parkin, Gwen Denny, Maureen Williams, John Stinson, and Stephanie Pearson-Ugal, all attending. Currently no members of the public. Second item on the agenda, approval of minutes from the December 4th, 2020 Easton Reading and Region 9 Boards of Education Policy Committee special meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Chris. Do I have a second?
I think that would be you, John.
Maureen was on, right? Yep.
Yeah,
Good.
I said,
Yep.
yeah.
Good. Discussion? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good. And one abstention. Good. Passes 3-0. Good. That takes us to public comment. No members of the public being present. That takes us to item number 4, committee member comment. Any comments? Okay. Hearing none. That'll take us to discussion and possible action. Item A, continue with our 3000 series and tri-board governance structure conversations. Just a note on the agenda. So we have 3 items under discussion and possible action. I don't think that we'll have other policy items, but we definitely want to get to the regular meeting schedule for the 2021 and solidify that.
Yeah.
And I think we'll just save maybe the last 10 minutes to make sure that we get sort of fully through that part of the discussion. So I have a hard stop at 10 o'clock. Does anybody else have a hard stop then? Because I could actually adjust my schedule a little if I need to.
I do. I have another meeting that begins at, actually I have a meeting going on right now, but I have another one at 10.
Okay. All right. Very good. So, so on the 3000 series, I'm going to share my screen. Oops. Okay. So the last time we got together, I believe, there we go. I believe we made it here. Okay, so.
It is that time again, John.
I swore I wouldn't make that mistake. I swore I would zoom in before.
Now, see, you can shift the blame to me and say that I anticipated it too soon and you were.
That's right. I was just about to. That's right. I was just about to. So, I think where we're at in the process on the 3000 is we've got a number of items that require follow-up, discussion, review of contracts, looping back with various other committees. We reviewed some content that related to food services, reviewed some content related to transportation, and we think that these are the appropriate course of action on some of those policies in terms of checking what the sort of current practices as well as what the intention is for the future is to connect with the transportation committees, connect with the food services committee. So we're sort of collecting a series of to-dos for ourselves, and as always, we've been putting those in the comments. We've also been identifying a number of places in the policy that may require a review of the current contracts and the sort of adherence to what would be proposed in the policies we see here versus what is in our contracts, and especially when it comes to the places in these policies that relate to oversight. If we were taking on the responsibility, if we had sort of our own employees doing busing, our own employees doing food service work, et cetera, then it sort of, that's the way that the policy seems to be written. And so we want to make sure that we're able to adopt or adapt the policy so that it aims at, we are contracting this. And that doesn't mean that we lose all responsibility for oversight of those things, but it's a different kind of relationship with the sort of oversight function than is articulated inside of these. Anyone have any comments on that, or any amendments to sort of the way I characterize that?
Nope.
Okay. All right. So what we talked about last time, and I want to make sure, sorry, I'm going to, okay, so this is good. So EDD, I just want to make sure that good, December 4th. So EDD, enumerated duties. So we continue to find things that we're tagging to include there. Deep dive on GoGuardian. We had a bit of a sort of rabbit hole conversation last week on GoGuardian. And actually, Stephanie, I think it would be useful to sort of loop you into that conversation. I know, you probably love just going back and watching the YouTube videos for these conversations, but in the off chance that you didn't get a chance to watch that, the question in the policy here, talking about sort of electronic mail and sort of the question about other electronic resources and privacy sparked a conversation about GoGuardian.
Okay.
And I can say from my own perspective, I have concerns and questions about GoGuardian and the use. I don't know that we've been perfectly transparent about sort of what it is, how it works, who has the ability to do what.
Right.
Sort of broadly, I know there's the typical terms of use type of agreement that parents and students see, but a sort of deeper and sort of more transparent discussion there, I think is simmering on the back burner.
Okay.
And I think the quintessential question for me boils down to, what does it do? Who has the power to use it? And are we using it? And if not, if we don't have clear examples of it being employed to improve student outcomes, if it's purely used as a kind of wrapping people on the knuckles thing, and maybe even not that way, if we're not even using it to sort of detect when kids are off topic or not being focused, then there are many questions in my mind about the sort of trade-off we're making that could come in the form of the sort of privacy intrusion and things like that. So,
Sure.
yeah.
So I can provide, I can gather more of a current update regarding our use of GoGuardian. I would say that my primary interest in getting the sort of amped up version of it was really for instructional purposes, because it allows the teacher, and this was when we were completely in person, it allows the teacher to monitor small groups if they're working, say, on a shared Google Doc. And then if the teacher sees a group that's doing something that's worth sharing, the teacher can then share that screen with the rest of the class and use it as a teaching opportunity. It can also be used, of course, to monitor the students' activity when they're on the internet. Although I don't believe it's currently being used that way while kids are at home. It's used that way when they're at school, but I can get a more current update regarding that. I completely agree with just the communication piece of this. We did run into some problems with it last year, because when parents used the same computer as the students and didn't log out of the ER9 account, the whoever was deemed sort of the administrator, which is sometimes an IT person, would get an alert regarding inappropriate activity when it really was just another member of the household doing whatever. So I think clarified communication and again, just an update regarding our current use. So I can gather that for our
Thank
meeting.
you. And at least as of right now, if you are logged into Google Chrome rather, with your ER9 account, a student ER9 account, then that Google Chrome instance is automatically installing GoGuardian, even if you're at home. And that's a big part of the concern that I have, especially when we're talking about devices that don't belong to the district. And especially because I highly doubt that teachers are using the, sort of let me see what everybody's doing. Oh, hey, you share your screen type of thing right now. So I'm, the sort of balance there is.
Is this on my laptop right now?
Possibly.
If you have a student who is logged in with their ER9, yes. I don't believe our accounts, and I can, I'm logged in right now, and I could actually,
It hasn't pushed down to my account.
Yeah, if I go to, what am I doing? I'm going to.
And that's if you're logged into Chrome under that account, not just if you log into your email. Like if you're logged in as, John Stinson1 at Gmail, and then you access your email, nothing's going to get pushed down.
That's correct.
No, but he uses this computer sometimes, or sometimes we're working together. And so I'll have his classroom open on, we'll both have his stuff open on both of our computers while he's working.
The distinction is whether Chrome itself is logged in or whether you're logging in through the web to access Google applications. And
that's correct.
It doesn't seem like a distinction, but it's pretty material in what happens on the backside.
That's exactly right.
Well, I'm boring on my computer then.
Yeah, I want to say it doesn't work on the Macs. So I don't think at the high school, if it's a student using a Mac, at least when we're in person, this comes into play.
Regardless, I do think you need a little bit more transparency and clarity for people like me who can wander through this conversation with you, but barely. And I'm sure there are others like me who can wander through this conversation, but barely. There needs to be much more specificity in
the people on this call are very much the right side of the bell curve on all of this, not the core of it.
I would put myself at the front of the line for tech savviness, right? Like, I understand this stuff. I did not understand this until March, when the kids came home and we had to try to figure out why, when they went to turn in a document, when they went to turn in an assignment, it was saying you can't turn in this assignment. And it was because they were signing with their regular Gmail instead of their ER9 in the browser. And so when they had to log into the browser, then I start to see these weird extensions installing and like, wait, what's going on? And when I brought it up with the cybersecurity kids who are in 11th grade and 9th grade, now they knew all about it. And they say, oh, and it does this and it does this. I'm like, whoa, there's no way that's true. And, dug in a little bit more and, was a little alarmed. So.
Okay. I'll get an update for next week.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we went through, so we sort of got through all of this, and I think ultimately we finished this, right? So I'm just making sure this was all sort of regulation here. Right. This is where Maureen had stopped on the third. Yes, Maureen.
I just wanted to say that Chris and I had a brief conversation about school meals that perhaps he can articulate to Stephanie, and Stephanie can give us some input on too, because that frankly was something we talked about last week that was somewhat alarming to me and particularly regressive for certain families.
Right.
So maybe Chris could address that, since it was definitely Chris that brought it to my attention.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the top level question, this relates to how the charge accounts work and My School Bucks and the fee structure, in as much as families are limited into the amount that they can deposit into their My School Bucks at a time. And there's a flat, I think it's a $2.50 or $3 fee that is charged no matter what the size of the distribution is. And I'm sort of curious where that money goes and what agreements are in place as to what that funds. And B, I think we have concerns from an equity perspective as to the potentially usurious nature of these fees. If somebody is if somebody is funding the account at $10 a hit or $20 a hit because that's all they can afford, they're getting hit with 25% fees, as opposed to funding it at $100 every time, in which case it's a 2.5% fee. But regardless, the fact that you cannot fund it more than $100 and something at a time creates an auto. You can't work around the fee and dilute it. And the fact that it is fixed regardless of amount is awfully regressive. And so that just sparked a broad range of concerns that sort of spiraled the conversation last week too.
Well, when it's not a pandemic, you are allowed to just send in cash or check. I mean, I'm too cheap to pay the fee just on principle, so I always just send in a check. Like, I'm like, oh, I'm not giving that company my $2.
Nice.
That's great, but you know what? The reality is that maybe some people don't have cash and are accessing credit to do this because of whatever financial circumstances they're in, and it's still terribly regressive. You know, we can opt out if you have the cash to opt out with. If you're living on credit because you've lost a job or whatever, it's still a penalty. And even moving beyond that, Chris had some concerns, and I share them, who keeps this 2.5% fee, right? And is there a way to do this without that fee? I don't know that there is or isn't, but there might be.
Right. What's the aggregate processing cost? And what would it cost for the food service fund to eat it, even? No pun intended, but
I'll follow up with Clarence on that.
Cool.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So it's interesting to me. We've had a number of questions as we've gone through the 3000 series. The 3000 series was the sort of meatiest that we've gone through so far. We've had a number of questions, but they've mostly been, what is our practice? What is our, and in the last 20 pages of this document, we came upon a couple of items that, when we dig in and sort of discuss, there's meaningful conversation to be had. Framing that in sort of contrast to sort of the appropriate roles of the boards in oversight, I think there's a really interesting question there, and I want to dig into that, not necessarily within this conversation, but when we start talking about the roles of the boards, it feels like there's a nice healthy dynamic here of us sort of digging into the policy and then saying comparing it to practice.
Because if we go back to our sort of guiding principles for this whole project,
right,
it was primarily keep it simple, stupid. Right. We're going to follow the law, and we're going to make choices that are compliant with the law, and we're going to create policies that are narrowly tailored to meet our legal obligations, basically.
Yeah.
The last week or two, we've gotten into these issues where there is policy choice within the construct of what is legal. And that really gets to philosophical questions that we haven't had to grapple with before. And I think ultimately will have to be percolated to the boards generally for some direction as to philosophically, are we going to continue in a mindset where we have these sort of, cheese and bread shame meals, or are we going to philosophically say, we don't like this as a practice, and so we are going to enshrine a policy that takes a different tact, because we're not legally obligated to serve only cheese sandwich if somebody is overdrawn on their account, but we're permitted to. What's the philosophical direction that we want to take?
Yep. And by the same token, we may be legally entitled to, install things like GoGuardian that could let us do this and this and this, but we could decide we want to have a sort of an enhanced level of privacy or care for data security or whatever else.
Right. We want to impose additional guardrails on administration in this area, basically.
Right. Okay. Good. All right. So I think broadly speaking, there is work to do that is sort of going through this 3000 series and sort of ticking and tying each one of the notes that we've given and saying, okay, what is the sort of final outcome? Some of these we've left notes in here that say, this is regulation, remove this. This is a form, remove this from this file.
John, did we bottom out the 3000s? Did we get to the very end last week?
We did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because the last, and I'll just, quickly. So
I thought we had a page or two left. Maybe it was nothing.
I think so I think it was move to regulation, I think was the last one. Hold on, I'm just going back up. What's happening? Come on. So capital
I don't think
outlay
we talked
fund.
about this.
I'm sorry?
Did we talk about this last week?
I don't remember talking
I
about
don't
this
remember
last week.
talking about this
I
actually.
don't think we
Maybe-
bottomed all the way out.
Maybe this was the last one, Chris. Yeah. Okay.
This
don't
is
under-
realistic.
Yeah, I don't understand this.
Some
Why?
This
Capital
basically says you're not going to go make capital expenses or request capital funding outside of the normal budget process. And you're only
You froze on us. We might have lost Chris. Oh, you froze on us. That you were saying that we're not going to request capital funds outside of the regular budget process, and
there'll be a plan for it.
okay. What's the reason for that? I mean, that's not a function of law, is it?
I don't know. I drafted something in the alternative there just because I thought the whole policy was written poorly.
Yeah.
But I don't know if there's any sort of statutory reference in the bottom.
Okay.
But I think,
doesn't look like it.
this is probably born out of somebody's idea of best practice. And I think that it is a reasonable best practice to state an intent to have and maintain a
capital plan.
capital plan.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that the way this is drafted gets you there, but
Mm.
Well, and the idea that it should that capital outlay will be of similar size every year is not, sometimes you need to
right.
replace
way
all
too
your
s-
floors and sometimes you don't.
We are way too small to say that we have $5 million in capital every year that we're going to allocate between our 700 buildings, however it's going to be.
Right.
We either have a large scale capital project or we don't.
Yes.
And you'd have to sort of spread the outlay out over a period of, a decade and say, that's how we're going to move it. But
Okay, do we want to, I'm just going to paste this language. Board shall endeavor to limit the approval and a request for approval of capital purchase so that they are considered for approval contemporaneously with the annual budget process. That seems a lot cleaner to me,
It is cleaner, I think.
and I actually understand it, so I'm pro that.
I mean, to the extent we want to have a capital outlay policy at all. I mean, the other alternative is just to get rid of this.
That's what I was going to question. I mean, is this
Right.
something that we need? I think the statement that Chris created is very clear, but is it responding to a need?
Yeah, to date.
I think
don't
from a
think it's been-
governance perspective,
Mhm.
and the sense of sending a signal to our communities that this is how
It's signaling.
this is our approach. It is a thoughtful approach, and here
Mhm.
are the rules for which we are ever going to consider capital outside the budget process. Because we have people in our community who say, "Oh, there goes the town again, sneaking in a little budget town meeting in October just to squeeze another $1 million from the taxpayers."
Mhm.
Right.
This sort of sends a
Keep the
signal that
snow
we're not
out
in
of
that
the
business.
building.
So it's as much a
Purely
signaling of
signaling.
regulations
Mhm.
policy as it is really a response to a need.
Yeah.
Right.
I see.
It also doesn't hem us in, in a way that you can't do it if you need to.
Right.
So,
Endeavor to limit is basically a statement of intent that is not
right,
binding.
right.
It's
Okay.
an agreement to agree, right?
Yeah. To
Right,
try
but
to agree.
limited
To
and,
try.
and time sensitive needs. That's helpful to have
Right.
at the
Yeah.
end.
Right.
Right.
Okay. All right. I'm just going to scooch up a little bit just to make sure. Yep. This is regulation file. So, all right. So
Did we have a discussion last week about document retention at all? I think we sort of got near it, but I don't think we did.
We
think
didn't do a
this-
deep dive on document retention at
And
all.
this was a policy that I think I have operational questions about and how it relates to policy, because there are litigation. Yeah, because we didn't get to my laugh out loud about the federal rules of civil procedure. The concept of litigation hold is very different from the concept of a document retention policy. And the state has certain document retention obligations that it imposes on public agencies, and we need to be cognizant of those outside of litigation hold expectations, which are typically elevated in certain circumstances. And some of these policies kind of get at one but not the other, and are kind of conflate them. I was a little concerned with. So I just want to make sure that we are being clear about, we will follow the document retention policies of the state as they are imposed upon local boards of education. And also, to the extent that there's ever a litigation hold, we recognize what that is. I'm not sure we need a litigation hold policy. I think that is a management prerogative directed by our legal counsel from time to time as necessary. But I think we definitely need to make sure that we are complying with the overall retention obligations that the state imposes. And I don't think we need legal references to Rule 34 and 45 of the Rules of Procedure related to the inspection of documents and subpoenas in civil matters.
Somebody thought that they were being sophisticated by this is not my area of expertise, but I do know enough to know that it can be very thorny, and that if you don't have a litigation hold policy somewhere that someone in central office can see and understand, you can be, for lack of a better word, bitch slapped by not having one. So I would just really suggest that if we eliminate a litigation hold policy from here, we verify that we understand that there is one within central office, or there's a pattern and a practice.
This is an area where I might even say having a form is not bad, because you can have a form drafted in conjunction with outside counsel where there are a handful of blanks that get filled in every time that there's a need for litigation hold, and the policy directs when you need to be issuing a litigation hold. Any litigation or threat of litigation, all custodians shall be, sent the attached form, as well as a copy should be provided to the board's counsel, because the board's counsel could then say you need to update the form.
Right. I like that.
You got that right, John?
Yeah, got it. Oh, so document retention policy. That's not this. This is the hold policy, right?
Because, well, the first sentence kind of talks to retention, and the second sentence kind of talks to litigation holds, and that's where I had this concern that we're blurring, because whoever drafted this, I don't think fully recognized the distinction. Right.
So that I think we probably want to go here and create a section that separates these two clearly.
Can you scroll up to the prior policy? I think there might have been multiple on this topic.
Okay.
So here we're on litigation.
Yep. Okay, good. Well, this is holds. Retention of electronic mail. So
the Connecticut State Library issues the guidelines for document retention for public agencies.
Less than permanent messages.
Right. That's where, if I say, John, can you meet on Tuesday? We don't need to retain that. But if I say, John, I think this is an important issue, blah, 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 it has to be retained.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So there's
this regulation is
all regulation.
What the state's guidelines are, but they may change from time to time, which is why I hate getting that detailed.
Right.
But it is important that people understand what they are, and so this is an area that would really, I think, need to be paid attention to annually and bookmarked for that purpose. Hey,
and compared against our current practice.
Right.
I mean, I don't know, Stephanie, have you, in your time in the district, ever been part of a document retention training?
Not a training. I have, from time to time, reviewed the current regulations with respect to document retention over the summer when a building wants to do a major clean out. And then they are often surprised to find out what they cannot actually toss.
It feels like some kind of regular schedule of training on these things. It sounds awfully corporate, but it's where you kind of step in something. If you accidentally threw out, I didn't know that this box was a problem. Well, it had John Doe's records from 3 years ago, and we were supposed to keep them for 7 years, and we didn't. And now we have liability because we can't disprove something.
Right. So it's, yeah, the things that, in terms of storage, the things that we need to keep for, 50 years that often surprise people. And there's been some effort to move things into electronic storage from the paper storage. And then lots of conversation about the process, because it's oftentimes the procedure is that you package up all these paper materials and you send them off to a company that then provides the electronic file. And there's some worry about, we know that we need to retain these things. It feels worrisome to then mail them, ship them off to a remote location to have them processed. So there has certainly been conversation on this topic. Regular training, I'd say no. I think when I go and look at the current regulations, I'm often, it strikes me that they just seem so antiquated.
Mm-hmm.
I think this sort of strikes me as an area where it would be helpful to have some sort of renewed focus from a project management perspective on, let's call this out as an area of concern, figure out what the best practice is, and are we digitizing everything? If so, how? If so, where? If so, by whom? Then who's shredding what and when? Who signs off on these things? Just so there's a workflow, that we don't have this sort of nagging anxiety or worry that maybe somebody in one of the buildings doesn't get it right. Chains of custody and things. It sounds overbearing, but once it becomes a routinized process, it provides everybody greater security as to meeting these obligations, because they can be hyper technical when you get into transitory communications versus substantive communications, all that other stuff, and concerns about, even if you get into board member communication on email or non-ER9 email or whatever else, there are retention obligations there. Like whenever I get an email to my personal email address, the first thing I do is forward it to my board one, because I don't want the obligation of remembering to keep that for however long. But I don't think everybody else shares that. And when we have FOI training every so often for new board members, Tom does a nice job, but doesn't necessarily, but will tell you he's not here to talk about retention, but nobody's ever there to talk about retention. And so it's a lost understanding.
I agree. I think, and especially given the amount of administrative turnover that we've had in the last few years, and other clerical staff turnover, at least people are, I think people are wise enough to say, I should probably check with someone before I do X. But sort of regular training, and even sort of a go-to of, you have to go through this checklist before you can take action.
I agree. And I think to the comment made earlier about this feeling corporate, like at least once a year, we have to go through our document retention, our anti-discrimination, our sort of et cetera policies. And it's actually, there's a way to do it that it's not just this like, oh yeah, I click, right? And certainly when we first started doing that, maybe 15 years ago, it was a check the box and nobody ever looked at it. It's become it now comes from not just some random mailbox, it comes from the CEO, along with here's why this matters. Here's why this is as much about who we are as anything we do. And I think that it would be smart for us to have something from the superintendent saying, here is, at least to all administrators. I can imagine even it going to every employee.
And I think you probably designate a retention officer in each building and a retention officer at central office. And before anything is destroyed, the retention officer in both needs to sign off on it. Even if it's, it's a 5-minute thing, but it provides, just like signing a check twice.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got another deeper discussion to have here.
Yay.
Adding to the 3000s here.
I also speak with Clarence, since he's most recently worked in such a large district, to find out how they handled this process there.
I have a suspicion he'll have ideas.
Yeah. And maybe even like there's actually a vendor who does this really well, and you give them $1,000 and they do it.
Right. Who handles school stuff or public agency stuff.
Right.
But I mean, if the extent to which we are permitted to go paperless and can in a lot of these things, we will all feel better about a lot of things.
Yep. Yeah, agreed. And I think we have you don't know how to spell harassment. And if we end up in a place where, we can sort of create a routine out of these practices, I think we'll all be really so much better off. So
we can take it on the road and show other districts how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a dimension of this process where I would like to look back to Cave and say, like, hey, we've been knee deep in these policy documents. I challenge any other district to show us that they've done this. Like, we want to talk to you about this. We want to establish a new set of norms. I also think the question about antiquated policies related to document retention could be a function of a legislative priority right? And we don't have to invent it from whole cloth. There are plenty of states that have updated their process to match, the current reality.
Yeah, I could be wrong.
That is semi-bipartisan.
70s
Yeah.
Or ought to be.
Right.
I'm sorry, Stephanie, what did you just say?
I said I could be wrong on this. I'll go and check later today, but I want to say it's like from the 1970s or something.
I suspect you're right. If it's anything like what the policy was prior to the executive orders that allowed for these meetings, telephonic meeting was allowed. That's nice. We're 20 years into, Skype has been a thing. Like, come on. So, all right. So being mindful of the time. So we want to talk about the calendar conversation. So I think we don't have any general other policy items. We're going to shift to the regular meeting schedule for 2021. So I think what we had talked about before is just establishing Fridays at 9:00 as regular meetings that would give us the flexibility to, one, just make sure that they're automatically sort of on the sort of being noticed, but also if we needed to adjust agendas that we have.
We could add things on Friday mornings if we need to. If you can let me share my screen, I went ahead and just sort of placed, let's see.
Can I interrupt for a moment? I just checked online. I was wrong. It actually is from 2005, but could still be reviewed.
So I quickly threw together every Friday in the year 2021.
Nice.
And here are the Fridays. And I noted, this is Good Friday. This is the day for Thanksgiving. Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve are both Fridays next year. So if we wanted to decide if any of those are just not going to be scheduled, we can take those off of this calendar, and then we can adopt this as 9 a.m. And I guess theoretically, we have to adopt it with a meeting location of central office.
Sure.
Or where permissible, by telephonic or electronic means.
Right.
My hope and expectation is the legislature is going to formally enact something that will enable this going forward, but stranger things are.
Should we also look at July 2nd? That'll be 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, I mean, the Monday will be the holiday, but it's still the weekend. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Anyone else have dates that were highly unlikely to have the wherewithal to gather?
Whatever the Friday is before Memorial Day.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm going to guess that's the 22nd. Memorial Day is the 31st this year, so it is 29th.
And probably Labor Day?
Yeah.
Assume that's then. Yeah.
Cool.
So,
okay. And the intent would be that each of the dates listed here with New Year's, Christmas, 4th of July, Labor Day, Memorial Day would all be, nix those days, day after Thanksgiving.
I'm just striking them through right now so that there's no
Good Friday.
confusion.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
Are there any school
Columbus
break
Day weekend, perhaps, or does that affect people? Does that come in here, or
I think that
MLK
usually
weekend?
it's usually a 3-day weekend, right?
Yeah, or MLK? weekend.
And
We
certainly
can
we can
also,
also
we always
have to,
cancel what we have
right,
to.
we can always cancel
Right.
too, but it'd be nice to not have to have another thing to do there, but yeah.
Columbus Day is the 11th next year, and Martin Luther King is the 18th. So this would be the Friday before in October if we wanted to take it off the list.
Yeah, I think so. Good. And then the 18th, so that'd be the 15th of January?
Yeah, I think we want to keep the 15th of January because we're bumping up against the tri-board and we have a lot of work we want to
I
get done.
can,
But Maureen
in
cannot come
2021, I absolutely will not be here on the 15th.
Okay.
on 1/15/21.
Yes, I will not.
Okay.
And that's for work-related reasons, not for MLK-related reasons, but there's no way.
Okay. All right, I know we're against our time.
Okay, so I would make a motion then to adopt as the regular meeting schedule, the policy committee for the year 2021. The dates proposed here, which is every Friday morning at 9 a.m. with the exception of April 2, May 29, July 2, September 3, October 8, November 26, and December 24 and 31.
Second.
Any discussion? Very good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, unanimously passed. We have a regular meeting schedule. Excellent.
It feels
All
like
right.
a milestone.
Yeah, that is a milestone. All right. That takes us to public comment. No public being present. Board member comment. Hearing none. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? And we are adjourned at 10:01 a.m.